The quaint coastal town of Grey Ridge was a place of quiet beauty, known more for its dramatic, cliff-lined shores than for the peculiar phenomenon that frequently descended upon it. Often, without warning, the entire town would be swallowed by a thick, disorienting fog, a blanket of gray so dense it seemed to muffle the very sound of the crashing waves. It was during these times that a unique tradition took hold among the locals. Once a month, coinciding with the densest fogs, residents would retreat indoors, locking their doors and shuttering their windows long before dusk. They did this to avoid a chilling encounter with a local legend, a spectral figure they called the woman in the fog. She was a ghost, they whispered, a sorrowful apparition said to wander aimlessly through the mist-shrouded streets, her form barely visible, forever searching for something she could not find, a task left tragically unfinished in her life. Mia, a young writer with a penchant for solitude and a healthy dose of skepticism, had recently moved to Grey Ridge, drawn by the town's atmospheric charm and the promise of a peaceful place to work on her novel. She had heard the stories, of course, dismissing them as the kind of quaint folklore that small, isolated towns often invent to pass the time. To her, the woman in the fog was nothing more than a bit of local color, a charmingly spooky tale to add to the town's character. She saw no reason to alter her habits for a ghost story. But one evening, the fog rolled in unusually early, thick and cold, wrapping around her small cottage with an almost suffocating embrace. Unfazed, Mia decided to take a short walk along the coastal path, hoping the eerie atmosphere would inspire her writing. As she walked, the usual silence of the fog was broken by an unsettling sound, the soft rhythmic crunch of footsteps behind her, perfectly in sync with her own. She stopped, and footsteps stopped. She started again, faster this time, and the phantom steps quickened to match her pace. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, the rational part of her brain battling a rising tide of primal fear. With a trembling hand, she pulled out her phone, pretending to check a message while angling it to snap a photo of the path behind her. When she looked at the screen, a gasp escaped her lips, visible as a puff of white in the frigid air. The photo was dark and grainy, but there was no mistaking the image it had captured. Standing just a few feet behind where she had been, shrouded in the swirling mist, was the distinct figure of a woman, ethereal and pale, dressed in a long, flowing white gown. From that terrifying night forward, Mia's life in the quiet town of Grey Ridge was irrevocably changed. The spectral woman was no longer just a legend. She was a constant, unnerving presence in Mia's life. The ghost began to appear to her repeatedly, not just in the fog, but in fleeting glimpses around her home, a reflection in a darkened window, a shadowy form in the corner of her eye, a sudden inexplicable cold spot that would raise goosebumps on her arms. These manifestations were always accompanied by an overwhelming sense of sorrow and desperation. The spirit never spoke, but her intent was clear. She would leave subtle signs for Mia, a book on local history mysteriously falling open to a specific page, old newspaper clippings appearing on her desk, the scent of salt water and decaying flowers lingering in a room. It was a silent, desperate plea for help. Compelled by a mixture of fear and a growing sense of empathy, Mia found herself drawn into the mystery. She began a reluctant investigation, starting with the town's small, dusty library and the hushed conversations of the older residents. She soon learned the ghost's tragic story. The woman in the fog had a name, Evelyn Marsh. She had been a young woman who had vanished without a trace 30 years ago, on a night much like the one when Mia first saw her, a night of impossibly thick fog. The official investigation had gone cold, but rumors had persisted for decades. The townsfolk whispered that Evelyn hadn't just disappeared. She had been murdered, her body hidden so well that it was never found, her spirit left to wander in torment. Another foggy night descended upon Grey Ridge, heavier and more oppressive than any Mia had yet experienced. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, the silence broken only by the mournful sound of a distant foghorn. As Mia sat in her cottage, staring out at the impenetrable wall of gray, a cold draft swept through the room, and she knew she was no longer alone. Evelyn's ghost materialized before her, more solid and defined than ever before. Her spectral eyes, filled with an ancient sadness, locked onto Mia's, and with a silent, beckoning gesture, she turned and glided through the closed door. A strange compulsion, a feeling that she was meant to follow, washed over Mia. Grabbing a flashlight and pulling on a heavy coat, she stepped out into the chilling mist. The ghost of Evelyn Marsh led her away from the town, away from the familiar coastal path, and deep into the tangled, ancient forests that bordered the cliffs. The trees loomed like skeletal giants in the fog, their branches reaching down like gnarled fingers. Evelyn's ethereal form floated just ahead, a single point of light in the disorienting gloom. She finally came to a halt in a small, forgotten clearing near the edge of the cliffs, where the sound of the ocean was a constant, angry roar. The spirit pointed a translucent finger towards a patch of earth at the base of a gnarled oak tree, the ground slightly sunken and overgrown with thorny vines. Hesitantly, Mia began to dig with her bare hands, the cold, damp soil clinging to her fingers. It wasn't long before she struck something hard. With a final, desperate pull, she unearthed a rotted wooden box containing a locket with Evelyn's initials and, buried deeper, human remains. It was the buried evidence, the long-hidden proof that the whispers were true. Evelyn Marsh had been killed here, her secret buried for 3 decades. With the discovery of Evelyn's remains and the evidence of her murder, the truth that had been buried for 30 years was finally brought into the light. The town's long-held secret was exposed, and the man responsible, now an elderly and respected member of the community, was brought to justice. The recovery of Evelyn's body allowed for a proper burial, a final act of respect that the town had owed her for decades. On the day of the funeral, a light, gentle fog rolled in from the sea, but it felt different, less oppressive, almost peaceful. As the final words were spoken over her grave, Mia felt a familiar chill. She looked up and saw Evelyn's spirit standing by the old oak tree at the edge of the cemetery. The ghost turned to face her, and for the first time, the expression of anguish and desperation was gone. In its place was a serene, grateful smile that seemed to illuminate the mist around her. Evelyn gave Mia a slow, thankful nod before her form began to dissolve, shimmering and fading until she was nothing. More than a part of the fog itself, finally freed from her earthly tether, her unfinished business at last complete. In the weeks and months that followed, a noticeable change came over Grey Ridge. The strange, unnaturally thick fogs that had once plagued the town on a monthly basis ceased to appear. The air seemed lighter, the atmosphere less heavy with unspoken grief. The legend of the woman in the fog began to fade from a chilling local warning into a historical tale, a sad story with a resolved ending. Mia finished her novel, her writing imbued with a new depth and understanding of sorrow and release. She chose to stay in the coastal town, her little cottage now a true home. And though the terrifying apparitions had stopped, every so often on a particularly misty morning or a quiet, overcast evening, Mia would feel it, a sudden, inexplicable cold presence lingering nearby, a gentle touch of a cool breeze on her cheek. It was no longer frightening. It felt like a quiet thank you, a protective presence watching over the writer who had finally given her a voice and set her spirit free. Evelyn was gone, but in a way, she was still there, a silent guardian in the mist.